see everyone here. Good morning. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Everyone enjoying the conference so far?
Yes.
That's good. I know it hasn't been too much. I'm from the east side, Eastern time, so it's weird that this is morning still. I'm used to this being called afternoon. But seeing emails from my coworkers at 6 a.m., like, well, everyone got up early. Time zones are like that, I guess. But just to get an idea, how many of you are kind of from the Las Vegas area? Wow, we are in Las Vegas. That's not what I'm used to seeing.
Suburb of LA.
So, how many of you are more from West Coast side of things? Not too bad. Kind of central U.S. Solid. East side.
Best Coast.
Well, it's good to see such a diverse crowd. And hopefully the conference will go well for everyone, and thank you very much for coming and listening to this presentation. Today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that I think is really, really cool and very, very relevant. All so often we're seeing companies deploying full disk encryption and people using it on their personal machines too. But a lot of the problem I see with implementations of full disk encryption is we see encryption as this magical black box that just solves all our problems. It's encrypted, we're good. We don't have to worry about anything. But the plain fact is, full disk encryption, like any other security technology, it can and is vulnerable to different forms of attacks. And there's things that we can do better than just enabling it and setting it and forget it, so to speak, to better protect it. And I'm going to cover both sides of the coin. The ways that you can attack a full disk encrypted system, and also ways that you can better defend these systems to protect that information and ultimately protect your company's data, your company's intellectual property. So without further ado, just a little bit about myself. I'm a security engineer at Hurricane Labs, which is a Cleveland-based security company. We're an MSP that does everything from checkpoint support, Splunk management, network monitoring, all the full 9 yards. So get to get my hands into a whole bunch of different things, monitor systems across the world, across our customers, and it's been a great experience. Prior to joining Hurricane Labs, I was a student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, studied computing security and information assurance for my master's, kind of focus on forensics and data storage for some of my research in that area, as well as being a graduate assistant. And for undergrad on that, I studied applied networking system administration, so I had the security and the kind of the networking side of the coin. What really got me into security was the CCDC competition. Do we have people who've participated in that before? It's good to see a couple.
Wearing my shirt right now.
Yeah, I can't quite see that, but
yeah, that's because it's like 5 years old, so it's dark green on black.
Hey, you know, colors work like that. Yeah, that's why we're security people, not art majors. That kind of really set me into the mindset of what it's like to defend systems and what it's really like to get attacked constantly. And kind of way I kind of see it is it's my job now and my life is CCDC every day almost. So there's good and bad things with that, but it's definitely never a dull day for sure. Just to kind of get a feel for the audience and get everyone thinking about this topic, how many of you currently, and this is my make sure everyone's awake, how many of you have worked for a company or personally use a laptop? Hey, good, you guys are awake. How many of you, either as part of your company's deployment, either require full disk encryption or have it deployed on at least a set of systems? That's probably why you're here. Good. How many of you is it mandatory on every laptop system in your organization? Still a pretty good size, I would say probably about 2/3. How many of you will do that on your personal machines as well? Pretty good. I expected that to be a little bit less than the company mandate just because it's different, but it was a slight difference out of the crowd, but still about 2/3, which is good to see. How many of you, or in your organization, require this on other machines like desktops? I don't expect to see as many. Okay, but there are some people who do that on their desktops. What about servers? Is there anyone who's making servers have full disk encryption? one person or two person, three people. What are the reasons for doing servers? That's just something that isn't common.
Protect the pop the drive out.
Decommission.
Decommission.
Being able to decommission and not worry about the data afterwards.
Yep. When you're moving boxes from geographically from one point to another, and there's protected data on there, being doing it for that reason as well.
How do you deal with reboots? Something like ILO then, to decrypt the drive, or
Well, it's built into the controllers of the NAS device, so it's
Okay.
automatic from that perspective.
so it's an automatic decryption, but it's kind of seamless to the. We'll kind of talk about some aspects of that too. I think as part of this presentation, to kind of think about elements of that as well. But just to kind of get everyone on the same page, I know with the audience that we have here, you're all at least familiar with full disk encryption in some way, shape, or form. So this will be kind of a review and just get everyone up to the same speed. But some of the challenges that are introduced, management. It's a new step. It's a new technology that has to be dealt with. It's no longer the case of where you just give someone a laptop that has operating system on it. You have to have this encryption layer that's added in. So how do we manage getting that onto all our systems? How do we manage dealing with the user aspect? You have to have some way to decrypt the information for it to be useful. And how do you deal with updating the encryption? Say someone needs a key reset, or if your whole organization needs their encryption reset, or if you have a master password of some sort that gets reset. How do you deal with this? It's something new. It's an extra step. And as security people, we don't always like to have extra steps, although sometimes we do. The other aspect of performance implications, this was more of an issue when full disk encryption first started to be deployed, where people would really do drastic things in order to try to deal with the fact that their computer is acting slower because it has this encryption layer. The CPU is working harder. The drive, some of the technologies, solid state drives, for example, they can't do the same data duplication management that you would do if it was full disk encrypted, or if it wasn't. So there are performance implications less and less now, just because computers have gotten faster, CPUs are better at dealing with this. Another one of the is data recovery. Encryption is really annoying sometimes when you're trying to get data. Beforehand, you could just toss a drive into a machine, copy everything you wanted off of it, and you'd be good. Which is bad if the person who takes the drive is a bad guy. But if you're a good guy and you really need that data back and you have encryption to deal with, that's not really the best thing all the time. Kind of to go hand in hand with the data recovery are your forensics. Traditional forensics are going to be looking at the dead analysis of a disk. So you'd get a drive as a forensics investigator. You'd make a clone of the disk and you'd be able to work on it. Your MD5 sum at the beginning will match the MD5 sum at the end. You can recover deleted files and everything. Works great. You throw encryption in the process, and then it's not so nice anymore. You have to try to work around the encryption or decrypt the drive or anything like that, just because it's an additional layer. And I'm kind of going to the forensics a little more because I'm going to touch on this in the attacking side of things. Because data recovery, forensics, and encryption they all kind of go together. And just to kind of touch on another aspect is, as forensics has evolved, memory is becoming a bigger aspect of trying to manage a forensics investigation. Whereas this was a difficult shift for a forensics investigator and for forensics investigators in general, just because the mentality was from the beginning, once you have data, you do not modify it in any way, shape, or form. That being said, with memory, you have the issue of, in order to capture memory, you have to load something into the memory to capture the memory often. And you're coming with the point is, yes, we are manipulating data. And how do we get around this? The plain fact is, the information that's in memory is often valuable enough that it's worth manipulating that data in order to capture that information, because quite frankly, some evidence only does exist in memory. And in the case of encryption, there are the possibility of encryption keys and all that stuff being in memory. And when an operating system is running there is decryption that's happening as the operating system is executed. So that's kind of how forensics touches onto this, and obviously I'm going to go into more detail as we go on. One of the things that we constantly talk about in this industry is the whole idea of verification. The problem I see all too often, especially with the management side, is you'll see security as just a checkbox. Okay guys, for this audit, for PCI compliance, for HIPAA compliance, we need to have full disk encryption. That's what your auditor says. You deploy full disk encryption, you get a checkbox. You have full disk encryption, you pass. Unfortunately, a lot of the times we don't do that. And that brings up the important concept of trust but verify. And I know I've heard this once already today, and you'll probably hear it throughout the conference. The whole idea of trust but verify, to make sure that what you're deploying does what it says it does, and also try to attack something and try to see where the vulnerabilities exist in whatever you're testing. There's two ways that this can be done in the case of disk forensics, or even in forensic penetration testing, where you would, first you'd have a zero knowledge attack, where let's just say a laptop was stolen, you know nothing about the organization, the thing could even be powered off. It's just there, nothing about, no passwords, nothing like that, and you just try to see what you can do, knowing nothing about the machine at all. That would be a zero knowledge attack. You can also do a more authenticated approach where you can simulate certain scenarios. Say, for example, the machine was powered out when it was running. How does that throw into the equation? But the whole idea is you want to be able to do this like any other test that you would do on any other system. We have penetration tests for a reason. You want to find problems in your environment before the bad guys find them. Same thing for something like full disk encryption. Identify the shortcomings before they become problems. That being said, pretty much everyone here has some way, shape, or form that they're deploying full disk encryption. Let's just say that there's a laptop in your organization that was stolen. It could be yours right now. How many of you can say with confidence that that data is not able to be recovered? So we had almost everyone deployed encryption, and only 2 people are able to say that. Next question, how can you say that?
I've tried it myself and tried to get it, and I think I'm pretty good.
You think you're pretty good. How many of here can say that they think they're pretty good? I really expected more. so we all say, oh, well, we all suck, you know, we should just go home. No. But
there's room for improvement.
There always is room for improvement, absolutely. But, you know, since he thinks he's pretty good, he deserves a shirt, right?
Yeah, I do.
So, that being said, yeah, it's really, most of us can't say without a shadow of a doubt, or at least have some independent verification that yes, our encryption deployment is vetted and it's safe. So quite frankly, from what I'm getting from the audience here, we've deployed encryption. We think it solves a problem, but we don't know for sure. Is that kind of the general consensus that I'm getting from this room? I see some nods and I see some no's. So I guess we'll just keep barging forward and we'll see how this goes. And this is the part that everyone who does any kind of talking at a security conference, they want to talk about the hacking into things, the breaking stuff. It's the sexy part of security, quite frankly. But attacking full disk encryption. The plain fact is, breaking encryption is hard. They don't, unless of course someone's coming up with their own encryption, and in a lot of cases that's not really encryption at all, they're just doing some kind of encoding or not. But pretty much everyone is using some form of AES, and that's not just something that someone's going to say, okay, I'm going to break this tomorrow. It exists for a reason. It's not easy to break encryption. So in that case, a lot of times as a security researcher, as an attacker, as a pen tester, you're looking for the weakest link. I like to think of the XKCD comic on trying to break into an encrypted system. They present the idea of, okay, this is encrypted. Let's spend millions of dollars on the supercomputer to crack the encryption. And they're like, okay, but it's this form of encryption. We're not going to be able to do it anyway. But we still have this cluster, so we can just try to crack it anyway. What really happens, the other side of the comic on the right side, you spend $5 on a wrench and torture the person until they give up their password. Which is a problem that we as an industry face. The technology is very, very good a lot of times. But the people using it, or some other aspect of it, something very, very simple. Something Stone Age, so to speak. You don't need a wrench. You can just pick up a rock on the ground and to accomplish the same thing. Zero budget, and you don't even have to worry about approval and all that kind of stuff. But something like that, it's really, really simple. Anyone can do it, and what you spent all this time and money and effort on can be rendered absolutely worthless. And it's a problem that we face. But I don't want to look at this from a perspective of we're going to try to prevent users from giving up information when they're tortured, because that's not really a problem that we're here to solve. But the whole idea of, as someone who's trying to break into something, we've got to think outside the box a lot of times, and full disk encryption is no exception. So I want to jump a little to story time with Tom here. This is kind of an example of an actual forensics penetration test that I did for one of our customers. And it kind of goes into the details of what can be done. And obviously the reason why I'm talking about this is not because I wasn't able to get in. So to set the scene for this, there was an encrypted laptop that was stolen. And you could say this was left on, wherever, completely powered off. No information about the company, nothing besides, here's the laptop, there's some data on it, we know it's encrypted. One would think that that's safe. Show of hands, yeah. You guys, that should be fine.
Question.
Yes.
Which encryption method? Are we assuming that it's going to be full disk, not a credence, partial encryption?
We're assuming absolutely full disk. In this case, it was semantic solution. So it's your standard enterprise system. It's basically what you'd kind of expect from a full disk encryption solution.
Is that decrypted boot or decrypted login?
It's supposed to be decrypted boot. Which, and I'm going to get more into the details, yes, initially it looked that way.
Okay, TPM on or off?
No TPM in this case, but passphrase decryption.
The passphrase was it password?
It was not password. I had no idea what that was, and I did not need to know what it was. But for generally, when you think of that scenario, we're not dealing with something that's powered on, that we can dump the RAM and get the encryption key and all that kind of stuff. This is a powered off system. It seems like the case for something that should not be able to get broken into. And quite frankly, when I thought about this the first time I was presented with this, how am I going to do that? You have, the FBI. Someone comes across the border with a laptop. The agents at the border see on the screen incriminating data. The person powers off the laptop. This is an actual court case. They aren't able to decrypt it. They're throwing all the power of the NSA and the FBI at this thing to try to break the darn thing, and they can't get in. How the heck am I supposed to be able to get into this thing?
The wrench.
Semantic? Yeah.
Got to get the wrench, yeah.
Rubber boots.
Unfortunately, when this machine was stolen, I didn't know who I stole it from, so I couldn't torture them. Which, I try to be a nice guy, but sometimes, you got to do what you got to do.
Usually most company laptops have the username on a label on it somewhere.
Yeah, for some reason, when they stole it, it blew away. I got to talk to our project manager about that.
Call the help desk?
That is an
That's another
option, but it was
contest in the
not
room.
deployed in this case.
Okay.
And quite frankly, there was no information on there to indicate what company this was from. So I'd be calling every help desk, which I'd probably get some decryption keys or some resets, but it wouldn't help too much in this case.
What brand of laptop was it?
It's a Dell.
Take the service tag, grab the warranty information, find the company.
I like the way you think. But, okay, so the way we're going to kind of look at this is from a forensics penetration perspective. And I know I mentioned about the zero knowledge versus authenticated testing. Initially, I planned to look at this from a zero knowledge perspective. No information about the machine whatsoever. itch is there and try to do what I can based on that information. Authenticated testing was going to be the next step for this, where I wanted to try to simulate different scenarios. Say if someone left the machine, they went to the restroom, and someone tried to get the RAM, the information out of memory. Didn't actually have to do that, but in some cases, if you're trying to do a forensics penetration test for encryption verification, you'd want to look at it from both scenarios. So the real test on this fully encrypted machine, the person who gave this to us for this test, they were completely confident that wasn't going to be anything we'd find. And I really was skeptical too, and for most people here, there is reason to believe that this should be fine. The things that I noticed about this, got the machine, it was powered off. First thing, anything you do in a case of a forensics investigation or a forensics pen test, immediately you image the disk. You don't try to turn it on, don't try to investigate anything, you make a full disk image. You have your evidence drive that you never touch again, and then you have a working scratch disk, and that you can use to make duplicates of and work off of. So that was kind of the start of the process. And then once I had a working copy, I started kind of seeing what was involved. So we had our standard Dell laptop. You had your standard interfaces on it, USB, parallel, FireWire, PCMCIA. Nothing special, just your standard is a D520 laptop. But the other thing to mention about when I did the clone, used a write blocker, so there wasn't any chance of manipulating the original source disk at all. Which is kind of cool because, let's say for example this machine was stolen, you could put the drive back in, the company would have no idea what happened too. If they looked at it or even hired someone to look at it, they wouldn't see anything that would indicate the machine was tampered with. I fired up the machine, you got your semantic login screen, basically prompting for pre-boot authentication. So it looked like kind of pretty standard from what you'd expect.
Was it disk resident, or was it resident on another part of the machine separate from the actual disk?
It was disk resident, so if I put it in a different machine, for example, I would still get the same thing. If I didn't have that drive in the laptop, I could just use it as a laptop. So it was all built into the disk. And that information was copied over when I cloned the drive. So the breakthrough on this was a grace period for pre-boot authentication that existed. And the way that this was discovered was a bunch of trial and error. There was at one point when the system was used that there was a period of time where you could reboot the machine and it would not prompt for an authentication window. And the hard drive has no sense of time. So once I discovered what this was, and it took a lot of booting up the machine, and this was just a stab in the dark, but as soon as you boot it up, the disk knows that it's accessed and it's locked. But going back, I was able to locate the period of time from when it was last used to when this was allowed, and that was my working window. I could clone my source disk, my original state of the machine, reset the clock on the machine to that time, and basically have an indefinite time of working on the system. Once you see an operating system loading on an encrypted machine, you know that there is some form of decryption taking place. And then you don't have to worry about the encryption. You essentially can look at the operating system itself. In this case, it was Windows XP, so that happens. Not the most secure operating system, but any operating system that's running is subject to more attacks, and it's more vulnerable than something such as full disk encryption. So the whole idea of repeatedly imaging the drive to find where this window was, and quite frankly, there is a lot of luck involved in something like this, but it's not something that you would necessarily expect to find either. Once that was found, I could basically work on this machine indefinitely.
Could you boot to any other, like a slide CD or a USB drive before getting to the hard drive itself?
The way the machine was configured, you couldn't, but it was just a matter of changing the BIOS.
Sure.
That being said, it was a Dell model where even if they changed the BIOS password, there are the reverse, master password off of the service tag available for that. So.
Can you explain this window a little bit more? Is the data actually at rest encrypted, or is there?
Absolutely.
Is it at any point where it's unencrypted?
No, it is encrypted. If you looked at the drive during this window, it would look completely encrypted. You couldn't read anything. there was just some, it was basically tying the OS authentication to the pre-boot authentication,
So single sign-on.
kind of, in the sense of it would allow you to reboot within a certain amount of time. It was basically making it more convenient for the users.
So you mean you use the grace period so that you can keep working on it without being locked out?
Yes.
This was a policy setting for the specific product.
Yes.
Was it the default configuration?
That I'm not sure. I'm not all that familiar with the semantic solution, but when I presented it to the customer, they didn't really know that that existed, so I would assume it was probably the default. But it's about an 8-hour period or something like that, where if you are authenticated, you can reboot the system and it'll log you in, or not log you into the operating system, but it will just bring you into the operating system login as opposed to making a full
So was there a disk flag that was set for the time of the machine that would then bypass the pre-boot authentication? Or I mean, this has to be set somewhere on disk for the system to realize that,
It's part of the boot partition, or the pre-boot authentication
so, no,
sequence.
but you didn't do any further investigation about where this bit actually lived, and you can
No, I
actually
didn't
set
for
the clock
that, no.
manually in your disk image or any of that?
No, I didn't look into that, but that was something that was found, and it wasn't tied to the specific disk either. So this could work on whatever disk I cloned it to. So it was definitely something on the partition.
Well, was the laptop set to be managed off a central server to manage the encryption? But set that you've got to reboot off the network free afterwards to power on Ethernet support for patches. Was that the reason it was set up that way so you were able to get in?
I don't think it was set up this way, but yes, it did have to talk to a server to get information. I didn't have the server or anything. This was completely done off their network. So whatever information controlled that, I didn't have access to or didn't need access to. This was just the machine by itself.
So were the boot files decrypted on the disk, or was there a key sitting on the disk?
There wasn't any key sitting on there. It was just that I could find at least. But the boot partition for a pre-boot authentication, it has to be decrypted. Just because the computer's not going to be able to boot otherwise. So
Right.
something has to, the bootloader has to be
But
unencrypted.
depending on what point in the boot process you end up putting the password, makes a difference in how much.
Absolutely. And even though that this was at the beginning when it should be, the fact that it just basically prompted you and said, hey, yeah, you'll need to re-authenticate in the next, so many hours. I'm like, oh, that's nice. Okay. Oh, Windows. Neat.
Is there maybe a clear text parameter that could just be modified within that? So even if they had set a grace period of 1 minute, you could just change it on the disk. So
That I'm not 100% sure about, and I think it's something that could be researched into a little more.
is this something that would work against multiple products, or is there a specific product that this worked against?
This was semantics. When they did a retest, they used a different product, and I couldn't find anything similar for that. That being said, one of the recommendations was to force pre-boot authentication, and they absolutely did that. So any product that gives a grace period or does something that loads the operating system into memory is vulnerable to something like this, yes.
Do you know how the grace period works? Is it caching the key?
Well, the passphrase is essentially what decrypts the key, generally.
Right.
So it seems like there's something that's causing it to unlock that, or there's something on there that's storing it. What exactly is going on behind the scenes, that I can't say for sure. But for some reason, there would be some way to access the key because obviously the machine is accessing that. How that's being stored, if it's something that's unlocked with the passphrase, or if it's something that could be pulled off the drive, yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that. But obviously, once I had the machine running the operating system in this case, for something forensics, obviously, you want to have the smallest amount of data to work with possibly, just because you're looking through a needle in a haystack. So in this case, you downgrade the RAM from 2 gigs to 512 megs, just to make it a small working environment. And I had full control to do whatever I wanted. And using the FireWire interface in the laptop, which is a DMA interface, direct memory access, and that allows you to access the lower 4 gigs of memory without going through the operating system or the CPU. It just basically is directly accessible. So I dumped the RAM in that case to have an image of memory that should have contained the encryption key, and quite frankly, that wasn't absolutely necessary because there's this tool called Encryption that you can use to basically replace the password checking mechanism of the Windows OS and basically bypass that completely. So you can run this tool, it successfully replaces the code in memory. You walk up to it, type whatever administrator password you want, and enter, you're logged in. It's really nice. The end result in that was full admin access to the whole system. The system was encrypted the whole time, but if you're running in an operating system that you're logged in as an admin, it really doesn't matter if the whole thing's encrypted. You can just pull whatever you want. So if that had whatever information was on that drive, I had full access to it at that point.
I did this exact same thing with queuing, like moving into legacy. So I was able to access the menu directly inside the queuing virtual machine. So just FYI.
Yeah, memory is kind of the if you're dealing with full disk encryption, you kind of almost automatically have to look at memory too. They do go hand in hand. But a lot of people, and this audience is not going to say this, of course, because you guys are more familiar with this. They might think that, oh, our encryption failed. No, no, no. Encryption did not fail, but the implementation of it did fail. And this is one of the cases where a user convenience setting, hey, we don't want to have our users type in long passwords every time they log in. They just need to reboot during the day. But one little detail like that that you don't think would cause a lot of problems, it resulted in the complete failure of this whole deployment. And basically every single one of their laptops that was deployed at that point in time was vulnerable to this, which is a huge issue. And this was a zero knowledge attack both ways. As an attacker, I didn't have to know anything about it in advance in order to get in. And if that machine was returned to them with the original drive that I manipulated nothing on, they would not know that their information was taken. They would not know that their customer information could have been taken by an attacker until, of course, it showed up on Pastebin. Which, since this was a test, it fortunately worked out well for them, but it could have been a lot worse. So now the things that kind of set the scenario of full disk encryption basically completely failing. The question, how do we secure this? And that's what's all in your minds right now. Most importantly, understanding the vulnerabilities. And these are applicable to pretty much any full disk encryption deployment. Obviously, physical access. Most of the time, the reason you're deploying encryption is physical access, because if a server is sitting on the internet, a web server, for example, typically your average attacker is not going to drive to that data center and steal the server to get the information off of it. They're going to do a SQL injection attack, or they're going to do something else like that to get the information and exploit the operating system again. But full disk encryption is more of, we have machines that people can take, and we want to protect that. Obviously, what goes hand in hand with people taking machines is your unintended machines. Something that can be stolen, obviously, is much higher risk than something that isn't going to be stolen, of course. Your passphrases and your decryption keys, those are kind of the keys to the kingdom in a full disk encryption deployment. Passphrases and trusting users for passphrases can't always be the best thing. So getting that information is obviously going to be easier than trying to break into the encryption directly. And then you have also the memory resident information that exists whenever the machine is running. Typically when people have laptops, for some reason they want to turn them on and do things. Not quite sure why, but that's an important aspect. A machine has to be running in order to be usable. So what I like to say, a system that's completely usable is completely insecure. Likewise, a system that's completely secure is completely unusable. And we have to have a balance between the two. And this comes into the case of usability versus security. Some of these recommendations that I'm going to have will have minor impact. And there can be something that you can go home and on Monday you can implement this. Other ones, they might be a little more drastic and harder to implement in an organization. You might receive pushback from your users. And depending on what you're trying to secure and the risk of the information that is on the system that you're trying to protect, it might not be worth it. And quite frankly, that's what we must manage in security. But you really need to consider what options are the absolute best for your deployment and kind of choose the balance that's best. So I'm not saying to do everything, but one thing I definitely am saying is pre-boot authentication is absolutely not an option. Use it, require it, anything that's a system that's going to be out there, every time it boots up, must have a pre-boot authentication password before any operating system loads, period. Otherwise, as we saw in the pen test, there is a chance, although remote, that that could be bypassed if that window can be discovered if such a thing exists. So, pre-boot authentication, absolutely implement it. Now also, this might be a little bit more difficult to implement, but consider disabling your DMA interfaces. In the case of the pen test, this was FireWire, but there are other interfaces that do offer DMA, ExpressCard, PCMCIA. Quite frankly, those aren't used all that often. I would say that the majority of people who have those interfaces enabled, pretty much every laptop will have something that's DMA. FireWire is obviously the most convenient, but that being said, if a laptop has an expansion card, you throw a card into it, through the magic of plug and play, you now have a FireWire interface that provides DMA.
Don't forget Thunderbolt.
Yes, Thunderbolt is a big one, and that definitely has the same vulnerabilities as well. So, and that one is, since it's a display port as well, people aren't really disabling that as much. So, definitely something to consider. And I don't even know if there's a good way on a Mac to disable that. A lot of your corporate laptops, they have the BIOS options to turn that off. And the plain fact is I know BIOS passwords and all that can be worked around in most laptops. But what you're doing is by disabling those interfaces, you're forcing someone trying to break in to have the machine powered off in order to do that or access the BIOS. Because it's very rare to be able to change BIOS settings within an operating system. I know there's ways to do that as well. But quite frankly, most frequently you're going to be doing that with the machine powered off and in the BIOS. At that point, you reset the information that's in memory, and you don't make that something that someone can just grab easily. But the thought on the DMA interfaces, for most of your users, I would be willing to say that they're not required, and it's something that can be disabled. The exceptions would be, say, FireWire for your digital cameras and digital video capture, Thunderbolt, like he mentioned. I think he deserves a shirt for that one.
So do you think it's really worth the loss of convenience to somebody working there when all you gotta do is take the disk out of that computer and put another one? I mean, even if you...
Well, to take a disk out of a computer, there's no memory that's transferred. So the disk is encrypted. Once you take out the disk, basically the attacker gains nothing.
Oh, you're talking about if they get it installed on...
Yeah. So if the interface is disabled by default, someone steals the machine and it's still on. If they can't get to that memory information, you've essentially protected that system from that kind of an attack.
Upside down can of air.
Don't get me started on that. That is really, really, really hard. I've tried to do the cold boot stuff, and it sounds awesome to be able to do that. I've never been able to implement it successfully. Trying across different machines, trying exactly what they say, using various tools. It's never been something I've been able to pull off. And if you're ever in a situation where you're considering that, you better damn well try every other option first before you try a cold boot.
Right.
Because it's slim to none that you're ever going to pull that off. So that's just being realistic. Other options is disabling standby and also understanding the risk of hibernate. Standby, essentially, a machine is powered off with RAM completely activated and containing all the information that's in there. So if a machine that's in standby is stolen, that information can be retrieved. And hibernate's even nicer because a lot of times it'll just boot up the operating system and bypass your pre-boot. You make a clone of the drive, you have a working snapshot of the machine, and it's kind enough to copy the memory to the same state every time you turn it on. So as a forensics investigator trying to do a forensics penetration test on something like that, it's almost like a dream come true. So if you have something like that, if you need to deploy hibernate, a BIOS password or a power-on password isn't really a good option because it can be bypassed. You almost wanted to look at an ATA password on the hard drive to make that drive not accessible. But then again, and that's very difficult to break into the actual hard drive password, but you're also bypassing the full disk encryption. So kind of got to consider, like on my laptop, I use the power-on password, I use a supervisor password, use a hard drive password and an encryption key, and I think I'm okay. But there's a lot of different things to consider. Also, the management side of things, users are going to forget their passwords and their passphrases, and there's got to be some way to get around this, because users don't like to hear, well, you like that data? I'm sorry, you're not going to get that back. Which might be an option, but most of the time you have a help desk that's going to deal with password resets, and quite frankly, they can be vulnerable to social engineering. And if, say for example, the same master password is used across an organization, I've seen this happen. Someone gets that, and you can decrypt every laptop in the company without any problem. So you just need to get that. Then it would just be a matter of making sure your help desk does not just give these out freely, and also that stolen machines are reported immediately, which is difficult to do.
And backups.
And backups are always good. Anyone who says backup, I'm not going to give you another shirt, but anyone who says backups, if someone else says backups, I'll give them a shirt.
Yeah, back.
Yep.
I've been waiting for the magic word.
There we go. Backups are always good. And also the policy issue, leaving machines unattended while they're powered on. Someone walks away to the restroom, you as the sneaky attacker type can just plug into their firewall port, assuming they didn't listen to the rest of this presentation, basically get into their operating system, copy whatever information you want off of the machine, lock the machine when you walk away, they'll come back and nothing happened. So some laptops actually have the option, the Toughbooks, for example, where you can physically take the drive out of the machine whenever you have to leave it alone, as opposed to carrying the machine. That seems a lot more painful than just taking the machine with you. But something like that where you just do not leave the machine powered on and unattended, because there is a risk of that. And it all depends on what information your company has and what you're trying to protect. If there's actually a risk where whatever information on your machines, you have actively people stalking your employees trying to get this information, well, that kind of sucks for them too. But you just want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And also independent verification. This would be the case of where you have one company that says, hey, company A, our laptop was stolen. It had the database records of 10,000 of our customers on there. We have full disk encryption, so we should be fine. Or company B that says, yeah, one of our laptops was stolen. It had the information of 10,000 of our customers on it. We have full disk encryption deployed. Fortunately, this was verified by an independent third-party penetration test, and they tried a bunch of different hacks and weren't able to break into the system. So we have reason to believe that our information is secure. What company would you feel better about? Company A or company B? B, yes. So it at least demonstrates due diligence. And having that independent verification is not something that a lot of people think about, but it is a valuable step in a case of something like this. So our conclusions for this talk, full disk encryption, it's not bulletproof. It's not a checkbox that magically solves your problems, and it is vulnerable. That being said, failure of encryption is something that is quite rare. It's the external factors that you need to consider. The possibility of a machine being attacked through a direct memory access. Something else you didn't expect, such as a pre-boot authentication window. But it's important to understand these risks and vulnerabilities and improve wherever possible. So with that, I'll wrap things up and take some time for questions.
So how often do you run into the password reset option enabled in these deployments?
It's pretty common, just because you have remote users, and a lot of times companies are valuing the productivity of their employees more than they're valuing the security of their data. So if you have a user that has to be down for a period of time at a remote site, that's often unacceptable.
Right.
And it's a risk.
Wonderful opportunity.
Yes.
What color is your car? What make was your first car? That kind of stuff. Huge exposure.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like that there's still more to be investigated, though, because just the fact that the encryption vendor has implemented this kind of bypass capability, even if you set that policy to say you will always
environments where you can just run a command within the operating system that works in encryption too. There's a lot of different windows, and unfortunately, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Any other questions we have?
I know you did mention the evil main attack. Is that a threat vector you consider?
Can you describe that for those who aren't familiar with that?
If you modify the bootloader so it installs a keylogger, so the next time the system is booted, it captures the reboot.
That is absolutely possible. Unfortunately, for something like that, it often breaks the operating system really badly. I know that was something that we actually tried to implement at someone in our company that we didn't like that much. By trying to basically rootkit the initial loading of that to try to get their decryption key, and I think they pretty much had to rebuild their laptop because someone didn't do something right. But definitely something like keylogger within the bootloader, sure, that's completely vulnerable. Hardware keylogger would obviously be an easier way to do that, but that would be hard or easier to detect as well. Where something like you're suggesting, that would be harder. Did I give you a shirt yet?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what about the scenarios where you're using like a PKI certificate, smart card, PKI certificate, like they do in the DoD? Does that change the scenario much at all because you're not relying on a password or keyloggers? Or?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Obviously, if someone's able to steal both the laptop and the card at the same time, then it's a lot easier because you'll have both factors there, or at least one of the factors.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the PIN. But
you wouldn't have the PIN, but you'd at least have the harder part of it to duplicate.
Assuming that they couldn't use the card because of the PIN, does it close some loops but leave some open to get around that?
It's different. So I think a lot like a government situation would be a case where it's a lot easier to enforce some of the other policies we talked about. So it does make it basically. From talking to people I know who've worked in these sorts of environments where you have the PKI like that, the Navy, for example, anytime something like that happens, it's a huge problem. Yeah. And the government can do things like that that a private company can't do, too. But it does change things.
So it's so harder that way.
It's harder in the sense of you don't have a password like that. But.
Thanks.
So the reason I really liked QEMU was you could take memory snapshots without having to alter the memory before taking the snapshot. So you like load it up like the thing. Have you tested SecureDoc ever? Disk encryption.
No.
Yeah. So you can actually, if you boot up to a live CD, you can set the QEMU to boot off the hard disk instead, and it'll load the pre-boot authentication into memory into a small virtual machine that you can persist to disk. You can take a snapshot of its exact state, just whatever disk, of a USB drive or something like that. And then you can use like strings, or you can do any type of file. You can carve the file system because it's a RAM disk, so you carve the file system out of the snapshot, and then you can just peruse it and get to the / etc/ / shadow, all that kind of stuff. And I was able to get to the root hashes and only crack one of them for the SecureDoc stuff. But this one also had if you pressed F12, you can get a web browser and pre-boot authentication.
Awesome.
So, what was that called?
SecureDoc? Yeah, don't use it.
Another vector that, if you're looking at, like, I don't know if it's within the scope, but doing pre-phishing with a keylogger using wireless. Like if you have a target, just attach something, and I've seen phishing broadcast over 18 birds recently outside the building, and then there was a separate device.
Wireless keyboards? Is that what you're thinking
Well,
of?
this was not a wireless keyboard. This was a keyboard with a built-in keylogger.
Oh, that's
So someone wired a keylogger inside of the keyboard, and it was broadcasting wirelessly over 18 hertz to a separate device outside the building. And then people were walking the building outside, the device outside the building, and picking up.
Wow.
And using those passwords to further.
How they get a social engineer their way into this?
They didn't have the cameras to find out.
Excellent.
Someone could have just.
So maybe those people who are in concrete boxes with Faraday cages are not completely insane.
Tinfoil hats for the world.
Yeah, something like that.
Have you used VMware to do any like pre-boot authentication attacks? Meaning, if the pre-boot authentication is not there, you take, let's say, BitLocker, and you have a usable disk that's not dependent on, okay, BitLocker is on TPM, but you take something that's not on TPM.
TrueCrypt, for example.
TrueCrypt. Boot into a Windows, okay, fine, DMA doesn't work. Have you been able to use VMware to boot that disk into VMware and just copy the vmem file out of that? Or?
The vmem file is basically a snapshot of RAM.
Yeah.
So you,
have you had to use VMware in any situation to do that?
not for some of these, but that being said, that's definitely the same approach that you do on a physical machine, with the whole difference being it's a lot easier to work with. So, and the techniques would be very similar. Yes.
How do you feel about TrueCrypt?
I think that it's a good product for what it offers, but that being said, there are ways to configure it poorly. So, anything we deal with, let's just say you buy a firewall. We've got a firewall, first rule, any except. You have a firewall, it's a router. Same thing for like TrueCrypt. You could deploy it and have a really bad passphrase, and then make the prompt that comes up, password is password. You have problems. They're dragging me away. So if anyone wants to chat about anything afterwards, hit me up. Where is it going?
There'll be a Q&A session down by the stairs, underneath the stairs.
They're gonna hide you. They don't want you to.
There's a room underneath the stairs. Close it, lock it. It's below the escalators as you came up to the conference center.
Okay.
And if anyone wants to follow me and chat about more,
I'm about to go walk down there for myself.
but everyone, thank you for attending. It's always good to have good audience participation as well.